Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, but before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck is going to be a little bit different from usual. And that's because today's deck is led by Ruby Daring Tracker, but actually she's not really the point of the deck at all. No, to arrive at the point of this deck, we have to go back in time a little bit to a recent very overlooked set called Ravnica Clue Edition, and in that mini set there was one card that just drew all of my attention, and that was Herald of Ilharg. I've been obsessed with this card ever since I saw it spoiled, and I've just been trying to find the perfect shell for it in which I can cast a bunch of very expensive creatures and trigger it a ton and then win the game that way. I put it into my Cage Brawler deck and it worked pretty well there, but as I was thinking about this, Outlaws of Thunder Junction dropped, and then a bunch of cards were spoiled that triggered on creatures having power 4 or greater, and that really pushed me towards building a deck out of Herald of Ilharg itself. Unfortunately, I'm not much of a green ramp player for the most part, so I don't really have that much background in playing ramp decks, and honestly, my friends even told me that I played this deck incorrectly once I actually got it built. But that's when I stumbled upon a video by Salubrious Snail, which is a YouTube channel you should absolutely check out. He's really good and his videos are amazing. And in any case, he had a video called How to Be a Greedy Bastard in EDH and Get Away With It. The video, as usual, was super informative and cool, and it kind of showed me that I could build a really consistent ramp deck by having a commander that was a 2-drop and tapped for mana, and then running a ton of redundant effects to ramp out 2 lands at 4 mana. That means that you can almost certainly consistently hit 6 to 7 mana on turn 4 of the game, which of course means you can start dropping fat after fat after fat, and that of course works very well with my Herald of Ilharg plan, which is what the deck was originally built around. So thinking I'd test out his ideas, I took his initial ramp package, modified it a little bit, and then added a bunch of cards that I knew I liked with power 4 or more, and then adapted it to the cards that I had in my collection. Salubrious Snail's video is a budget one. My deck is not budget, but it's also not that expensive. I'm basically just working with what I had at home, but of course you can substitute any of the big fatties for other big fatties. However, it's been an absolute blast of a deck to play, and the reason I arrived on Ruby Daring Tracker is because it fits quite well with the theme of the deck. Salubrious Snail's deck has Radha, has the commander, and basically there's very little difference between her and Ruby, other than Ruby has haste, which is nice. They both just tap for mana, and that's almost exclusively their purpose in this deck, but Ruby just synergizes a little bit by growing when she attacks if I have a creature with power 4 or greater. I liked the fact that she worked well with the theme of the deck, so that's why I decided on her being the commander. So yeah, without further ado, we're going to jump into this one, and I'm going to make it a little bit different since there's so much redundancy in the deck. We're just going to talk about different categories of cards. Starting off with ramp, we have a bunch of different ways to ramp. The most basic ones are ways that are going to search up 2 lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. So stuff like Circuitous Route, Explosive Vegetation, Hunting Wild's Invasion of Zendikar, Migration Path, Path of the Animist, Ranger's Path, Skyshroud Claim, Terramorph, and Vastwood Surge are all cards that are going to fill that purpose. They're the most basic ones. They all have a few differences, but generally they do the same thing. There's a few other cards, however, that are maybe a little bit less conventional, such as Big Score and Unexpected Windfall. These might not necessarily seem like ramp because you're not getting the mana boost permanently, but in this deck we don't really necessarily need it permanently, since our main goal is to drop early threats as soon as possible, and then we can just kind of play a little bit more normal after that. Drum Hunter is another card that I really liked from his list that I've always loved because of it being in Alara. It's really nice in this deck because it can draw us a card at our end step as well. Goreclaw is an excellent card in the deck because basically most of our creatures are going to have power 4 or greater, which means we can start actually double spelling 6 or 7 drops pretty early. Gwenna is one I added because I really like this as a way to ramp into fatties and grow a big fatty of our own in the process. It's just very, very solid and can allow you to double spell your big creatures. Now, initially, Salubrious Snail's list didn't really have that many cards that cost less than 4 because of his idea of cascading into stuff that was always 4 or greater, but I decided early on that I was okay with having a couple of things that cost a little bit less than that, as long as they fit the theme of the deck well enough. Krosan Drover is another great addition to the deck. It's going to make cards that cost 6 or more cost 2 less to play, as long as they're creatures. Silverback Elder is a slightly unconventional one. It doesn't cost 4, which is different from most of the others, but it is really good later on in the game when we start playing other creatures and ramping with this. Solemn Simulacrum is a classic one. It only ramps for 1 land, which is a bit unfortunate, but it's still great as a redundant way to ramp. After this, I wanted to highlight some creatures that provide removal in the deck. Drakusath, Maw of Flames is obviously very good once it attacks and starts dealing with stuff from our opponents. Gimli's Reckless Might I found fit the theme of the deck very nicely. Giving everything haste and fighting is also just really good though. Gruul Rage Beast acts like repeatable removal. I've been a little bit unimpressed with the fact that this one forces whatever you play to fight stuff. In some specific situations it can be a little bit awkward. Kogla and Yidero basically comes in and fights something, which is really solid. Kogla the Titan Ape has always provided a bunch of value, and it's nice to get some non-creature removal. Let the Galaxy Burn is really expensive, but we have enough mana in this deck for this to work nicely enough. Natural Reclamation is removal with Cascade stapled on. Now, one of the themes of the deck is being able to cascade into nice stuff, so this is always good to have. Noise Marine is very, very basic removal. It can only hit something mid to small most of the time, but that's still decent. Rampaging War Mammoth has been absolutely amazing in certain games. Being able to destroy multiple permanents for just one card is sometimes amazing. Sarkhan's Unsealing is one of my favorite cards from a while back. It's going to deal a lot of damage in this deck, and it's basically a must-answer threat because eventually you're going to be playing stuff with power 7 or greater and getting repeatable one-sided board wipes. Screamer Killer is an amazing finisher in this deck, seeing as we're playing so many cards with mana value 5 or greater. The fact that this can go face is fantastic. Steel Hellcat is a great way to deal with multiple threats at once it connects, and we have enough mana to sink into this. Trumpeting Carnosaur isn't always going to be removal, but the fact that it can be great cascade later on or just removal when we need it to is really good. Volcanic Torrent can be really good if we've played a bunch of spells this turn, or if we hit it off of another cascade spell, it can deal a ton of damage. Our Ancient Dread is another excellent way to finish off the game or control the board, since we're going to have so many creatures with power 5 or greater. Now moving on to our finishes and damage package, we have Combustible Gearhook, which is really good with the high mana value of the cards in this deck. Herald of Ilharg, of course, is the reason this deck was made, and it's such an incredible finisher in this deck. It just gets out of hand so very quickly. For our Cascade package, there's a couple of cards that I wanted to highlight, which are Annoyed Altisaur. Never forget that this guy has Reach and Trample. Those are actually both very relevant in this deck. Aurora Phoenix is very easily recurable because we're running quite a few Cascade cards. Into the Time Vortex is almost always going to be hitting more ramp spells, but we're absolutely fine with getting 2 of our ramp cards for 5 mana. Maelstrom Colossus can hit a lot of good stuff in this deck, and the fact that you can cascade into another Cascade card is incredible. And Sweetgrown Recluse can be really good at buffing a bunch of the creatures that have entered the battlefield this turn. For draw spells, we're going to be running Beast Whisperer, which is great in a deck with this many creatures. Bonder's Enclave is very, very easy to meet the condition of in this deck. Karuk's Pack Leader is another similar card to Beast Whisperer that can consistently draw us cards. The same applies for Karuk's Uprising, and this one also gives all of our stuff trample. Greater Good is insane in this deck. It's so good to protect against board wipes and as a way to refill our hand whenever we need to. Outcaster Trailblazer is another good card from Thunder Junction that pushed me to make the deck. It essentially only costs 2 mana and can actually act as a ramp spell of its own if we plot it, but then it's just going to draw so many cards over the course of the game. Primordial Sage is yet another Beast Whisperer effect. Shamanic Revelation is a great way to draw a bunch of cards at once later on in the game when we have a board. Soul of the Harvest is yet another Beast Whisperer effect. One of the things you'll notice about this deck is that it very rarely runs out of gas. Up the Beanstalk is one of the other concessions I made to cards that are less than 4 mana. This is just too good to not include in the deck. I feel it's going to draw so many cards. And Vaultborn Tyrant is amazing if you have it, but of course it's replaceable by any other fatty you might have in your collection. Finally, I wanted to talk about some random cards here or there that are just incredibly powerful. We have Soul of New Phyrexia, which is great to protect ourselves whether it's alive or dead. Paleoloth is very good for recurring or big creatures to hand, seeing as we're going to have lots of big creatures enter the battlefield. Doors of Durin is a lot of fun, even though you might occasionally whiff, as I often do. In this deck, there's just so many fatties that it's very, very easy to hit something with this. Apex Devastator is an absolutely sweet top end that is going to be really good, particularly if you're trying to rebuild after a board wipe. Cactus Sure Shot has been one of the most impressive cards for me for this deck from Thunder Junction. It has so many keywords and so much stuff stapled onto a good body that it's just a great mid-range creature, and it's going to make sure that anything you play afterwards can attack immediately. Emergent Woodworm is one that I've got to say thanks to Salubrious Snail for bringing to my attention. This card is an absolute beast in the deck when you get to attack with it and just dump something huge from your library into play. Molten Primordial is a classic finisher that works very nicely by stealing your opponent's creatures. And finally, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger is absolutely unnecessary in the deck. It's just something that I wanted to play because I love the serial art on the Secret Lair, and I've had it for a while without ever putting it into a deck. Feel free to swap it out for anything else. So there you have it. That has been my Ruby Daring Tracker deck. This deck has been an absolute blast to play, and I think Snail's video has kinda inspired me to look at deck building in a new way and consider more redundancy as a way to make my decks much more consistent. But what do you think? Does this kind of deck chock full of haymakers seem fun to you? Let me know in the comment section below. I always make sure to read all of your comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. subscribe, it really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.